Deaf culture. Introduction to deaf culture. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division, has developed the following content to provide on-demand training that builds your understanding of people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. This series includes 5 topics and 1 community panel discussion. You may start with any of these topics and watch them as many times as you like. We also encourage you to share links to these videos with your family, friends, colleagues, and partners. This video focuses on the basics of deaf culture. Not all people with hearing loss consider themselves part of the deaf culture. Most people with hearing loss consider themselves hard of hearing and function within their family using various strategies for communication. You can learn more about this in our training, The Basics of Hearing Loss. People who have a hearing loss who communicate primarily through sign language often consider themselves a member of the cultural and linguistic minority group, the deaf community. This training will introduce you to the language, behavioral norms, values, and traditions in deaf culture. Generally, people who identify as culturally deaf share 3 characteristics. 1, they identify themselves as deaf. Some may have some residual hearing or use hearing aids or cochlear implants, but typically not enough to understand spoken language or sounds. 2, most do not consider being deaf a disability. And 3, they typically communicate in sign language. In the United States, this means American Sign Language, or ASL. Someone who is culturally deaf may consider English or other spoken languages as their second language. ASL is not a universal language. Each country has its own signed language. There are also dialects in ASL, just as there are in spoken languages. It is a living language in the sense that it evolves and changes over time, just like any other language. Historically, ASL has been passed from one generation to the next, mostly through schools or community events. Today, a lot of ASL is passed through social media videos as well. People who have combined hearing and vision loss may not identify as a member of the deaf community. People who are deafblind and rely on what vision they have for access share similar cultural values and norms as people who are deaf and sighted.
Passing of culture. Culture is defined as a set of learned behaviors of a group of people. Deaf culture passes on traditions similar to any other ethnic group. Information, thoughts, values, traditions, and beliefs are communicated in deaf culture throughout American Sign Language. Key to this exchange is the shared life experiences that are unique to people who are deaf. These exchanges do not always reflect the deaf person's immediate family values and traditions, but rather reflect what is valued and shared among members in the deaf community. If a deaf person has family members who sign with them, then they may also have access to their family's traditions and cultures along with those of the deaf community. Deaf culture, 4 components. Earlier, we mentioned that deaf culture has 4 components: language, behavioral norms, values, and traditions. Language. The first component is language. American Sign Language, or ASL, is a language of the American deaf community. ASL is not just hand movements. It is a complete visual language with a syntax, a grammatical structure different from English. ASL is derived from French Sign Language and is more similar to spoken French. Learning ASL takes as long as learning a spoken language because you have to learn the appropriate way to use your body and your face. Facial expressions are used to indicate grammar, such as whether a sentence is a question or comment, and tone of the signer. Body movements indicate tense, location, and punctuation. The best way to learn ASL is from a native signer. For most deaf people, ASL is not the language of their household. Given only 5% of deaf children have deaf and signing parents, visual communication like ASL is often not the first way the family tries to communicate with their child. So, if language transmits culture through conversation with family, friends, arts, etc., how is deaf culture transmitted? Learning cultural norms and values may happen early in a deaf person's life if they are in connection with other signers and deaf peers, or much later, after they leave their home environments. Parents who sign and connect with the deaf community also pass on the family of origin values as well as those of the deaf community. Behavioral norms. Behavioral norms are the second component of deaf culture. Because many deaf people have families that do not sign, they miss out on incidental learning. Incidental learning is how hearing people learn about the world from what they overhear, not what is directly taught. Listening to family chatter, to conversations in public and in school, on TV is one of the ways our culture is transmitted. Deaf people are very adept at making up for this by connecting and communicating with each other. The need to communicate and share information is the basis for a great deal of behavioral norms in deaf culture. For people who use visual language to communicate, eye contact is critical. With visual communication, facial expressions and body language are just as important as signs. In deaf culture, greetings often include hugs, an acknowledgement of belonging instead of handshakes. Introductions include information about school and potential connections between people, not just a name and occupation. There are a few conversational taboos. The ability to have conversations about everything is a way to ensure everyone is up to speed with information. Deaf people will gather in brightly lit spaces, and events can go on for hours, culminating in long goodbyes. This doesn't mean all deaf people get along. It just means that there is a value to information sharing that supersedes some of those differences. Another behavioral norm covers attention getting, because you cannot get someone's attention by calling their name or making other sounds. Instead, movement or other visual cues are used. Appropriate ways to gain someone's attention include waving your hand, tapping the shoulder or arm lightly, turning lights on and off, tapping on the table, or stomping on the floor. In a crowded room, A third person may be asked to get another person's attention. Values. The overall values of any given person are complex. This is true of culturally deaf people. The deaf community shares certain values that are different than the mainstream population. For example, people who hear value sound and spoken language for communication, multiple channels to learn and share information through speech, writing, phones, texting, videos, etc. Ease of connection, brief communication with those around them, and the ability to interact in any environment. People who are culturally deaf fundamentally have the same needs for understanding environments, connecting with other people, and gaining information. However, the means leads to different types of values. People who are deaf value visual cues and communication in signed language, such as ASL. People who are deaf rely on multiple channels for learning and sharing information, particularly valuing access through vision, good lighting, good sight lines, visual signaling devices, captioning on videos online, in movie theaters and on TV, and visual communication through technology, such as video chat or using telecommunication services, like video relay services, to make connections and calls with non-deaf people. People who are deaf value efforts made by non-deaf people to ease communication barriers, such as learning basic signs, offering to write or text back and forth, and responding to them with respect rather than sympathy or fear. Traditions. Shared traditions are the fourth component of deaf culture. In deaf culture, most gatherings are in person because communication happens visually in the community. Face-to-face gatherings often lead to strong family-like bonds, lifelong friendships between individuals. Events often include deaf folklore, arts, history, ASL poetry, storytelling, and jokes. These gatherings allow deaf community members to socialize, participate in discussions, and pass on community traditions to younger generations. With social media, information about these gatherings can reach a much larger group of people. While there are deaf clubs and traditional gathering events such as homecoming weekend at the school for the deaf, many gatherings combine both visual communication access and special interests such as yoga, golf, happy hour, and more. There is a lot more to deaf culture, but now you know some basics. For more information and assistance, go to mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. To access the other videos we offer, please return to the training page on our website.
Copyright 2022, State of Minnesota, Department of Human Services. Produced by Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division. 444 Lafayette Road, St. Paul, Minnesota 55155. Voice or preferred relay service 800-657-3663. Video phone 651-964-1514. Website mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, DHS, prohibits discrimination in its public services because of race, color, creed, religion, political beliefs, national origin, sex, public assistance status, marital status, age, sexual orientation, or disability. Direct discrimination complaints to DHS Civil Rights Coordinator at dhs.info@state.mn.us or 651-431-2000. People with disabilities may request reasonable modifications to receive DHS services by contacting its Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at DHS_ADA@state.mn.us or 651-431-3040.